Hi, everybody. Let's talk briefly about email authentication. And by that, I mean our friends SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. So SPF, DKIM, and DMARC are the Trinidad, if you will, of email authentication. Together, they help us prove that when we send email or when someone else sends email on our behalf, that those servers are authorized to send email on our behalf. So SPF, DKIM, and DMARC kind of work together. Why isn't there just one standard? Well, SPF, that standard came out and it was pretty good, but they found that it didn't quite take care of things. So someone came up with DKIM and that was a little better, but still didn't quite take care of everything. And then they came up with DMARC to pull it all together. So here's basically the quick rundown of it. SPF. SPF, and by the way, all of these use DNS entries to actually help them work. SPF, all it is DNS entries. What you do with SPF is you go to your DNS registrar and you create an SPF record. And in that record, you put in all of the list of IP addresses or domain names that contain those IP addresses of SMT devices that are authorized to send on your behalf. They can be your on-premise servers, maybe you have Exchange servers, or maybe there's a Barracuda box between your Exchange and the outside world. Whatever actually does the sending, that IP address range, that's what you want on your SPF record. Maybe you have Office 365, in which case your SPF record will be the Outlook.protection.com or spf.outlook, and we'll look at it. Maybe you use Google, they have one. Maybe you use some extra services like MailChimp or some other service that sends on your behalf, DocuSign. Anytime your domain name is going to be in the from line, you need those services that send on your behalf to be authorized. So you could add them to the SPF record. So let's. This is a Macintosh, but it works the same as anything else. I've gone into the NS lookup command, and let's look up a typical. Let's just use American Airlines, and this is just the regular text record. I've set my type to equal text with the set type equals txt command. I already did that. And it looks like they've registered and verified their domain name in a couple of different places. You really should get rid of these verification records, by the way. There's no need to keep them around once you've verified. But towards the bottom, you see V equals SPF1. That's the SPF record. They got quite a few in here. You'll see domain names with an include in front of them. They send with Outlook.com, it looks like. And then you'll also see IP addresses. Now you can get into trouble with the domain lookups if you have more than 10 domain lookups, then the people that receive your email, they'll stop looking them up after 10. That's just part of the specification. And be careful, because you could have one domain name that someone tells you to use, and that domain name could look up other domain name that can look up other, they can contain each other, right? Outlook, actually the SPF protection Outlook.com does that very thing. So you could easily get more than 10 records. You can use a SPF checker to check that, to make sure you don't have that. You don't have to worry about adding IP addresses, and you can have as many of those as you like, but that gets a little tedious having to enter those in, and what happens when they change? Well, you got to go change them. So what does SPF do? SPF says that when someone receives an email from you, the SPF specification tells them to look at the reply to header. Now, this isn't the from header that people see. This is the underlying reply to header that SMTP servers use. If you're watching this video, we'll just kind of make the assumption that you sort of know what I'm talking about. So this is the underlying reply to. And it says whatever the domain name there is, it'll look up for the SPF record. So if my reply to says, Joe at AA.com, then it will it'll look up a DNS record for that, and if the server sending its IP address is in that SPF record, one of these, then it's all good. It doesn't check the from address though. So a clever, not even all that clever attacker, they could create their own bogus domain on the internet. They could register SPF records for it, and then their SMTP server could actually have that reply to from their bad domain. Meanwhile, the from address could look like it came from your domain. SPF has no way to stop this. So it's pretty easy to defeat, but it's a good start, and as we'll see, DMARC is going to kind of take care of that for us. That's it for SPF. What about DKIM? Well, DKIM is sort of a competitor to SPF. You can have either or. DKIM is better. It's harder to implement though, but it's better for this reason. What DKIM does is when a sending server uses DKIM, it actually uses public-private key encryption to create a hash of parts of the message, usually most of the headers. And it creates its own header in the record and says, well, this is the domain that it's supposed to come from, and here's how you look it up in DNS. It's got a specific way to look things up, and here's the values, whatever. So what is the receiver looking up in DNS? Well, it's actually looking up this record, and in that record is going to be a public key. They're going to use that public key to decrypt the headers, and if they decrypt just fine, then, well, must have come from the right place. So it's very difficult to get around. But that the domain name that it uses, once again, does not necessarily have to be the same domain that's on the from line. So once again, you can get around this by doing your own DKIM, your own signatures with your own domain, and then in the from line, just make it look like it came from whomever. But when you compare these two, DKIM is better just because it's much harder to fake. It's encrypted. It also helps with any modifications. If the header, the subject, anything like that is modified in the message, that will also create a DKIM failure. So it's a little better than SPF, but they are competitors. All right, so SPF and DKIM, they don't take care of the from line, the most important thing, really. So what does that? Well, that's where DMARC comes in. DMARC also is a record that goes into DNS, and really the record for DMARC just says, SPF or DKIM have to pass, first of all, and then the domains that are used in the passing SPF or the passing DKIM, whatever domain we use for those, that domain must be the from domain in the visible from line. That's one of the big things that DMARC takes care of. That's called alignment. So SPF could pass or DKIM could pass. Now when it comes to DMARC, DMARC's specification says you make sure that whatever's written on the from line, that domain, that's the same domain that we used for the SPF pass or the DKIM pass. So that's where that comes in. That's how we take care of the from line. Also, DMARC does a couple of other things. It tells the receiver what to do if a DMARC fails. And DMARC will fail if neither SPF or DKIM pass. Well, that's a failure right away. But if they pass but they don't align, that's also a failure. Okay, so what? Turns out SPF and DKIM, they really don't absolutely tell people what to do if they fail. So it's kind of left up to the receiving service to decide what to do. Well, DMARC also solves that. As part of the DMARC DNS record, you get to tell people that if DMARC fails, that they should either do nothing, just keep an eye on it, keep a list of it, or quarantine it, and that'll go to the quarantine depending on what service you use. For Microsoft, it will go into the hosted quarantine, Google, similar thing, or reject, which tells the receiver to reject it. Now, before we go any further, there's something weird about how Microsoft handles rejects in DMARC. If you send a message and you've done all your setup work and you got your DMARC set to reject, where you're telling the whole world, hey, If it doesn't look good, reject our email that's coming to you because we didn't send it. Well, Microsoft doesn't obey that. Microsoft doesn't obey that. Instead, they treat it like a quarantine, which means at most it will go into their hosted quarantine. It won't get dropped. And it could escape somehow. If you have some crazy forwarding and distribution list expansion, it could actually make its way out. So it doesn't really follow the standard. And they explain it this way. They say, well, you could lose a lot of messages because people don't set them up right. But I have to disagree with that. It is very difficult to get to DMARC reject. So if you get there, you know what you're doing. And you know that you want to tell people to reject your email. So there is a way to do it with Microsoft. You can create a transport rule. You can look that up, or we'll get to it in another episode. So if I'm looking for a DMARC record, I will look up _DMARC. Again, it's a text record. Whatever the domain name is. In this case, AA.com. And you can see American Airlines expects us to reject. Where you can see that with the P equals reject. The SP is subdomains. A few other things in there, but those are the real money pieces here. It expects receivers to reject email that did not pass DMARC. Okay, so that could be SPF or DKIM didn't pass, and either ones can be used for DMARC. Or they pass, one of them passed, but DMARC, the from did not align with the domains that SPF or DKIM use. Either way, DMARC would fail. And American Airlines is telling everybody, reject those emails. But once again, by default, Microsoft recipients, places that get email in Microsoft, they won't obey that. They will treat it like a quarantine. Again, you can change that with a transport rule. And by the way, transport rule basically says if a header comes in and the header, the authentication result header says DMARC equals O reject, then treat that. Then let's reject that. What's O reject? Why not reject? Well, that's how Microsoft bypasses it. They change the reject into an O reject in their inbound email. So anyway, that's the basics of SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. It takes a while to get to DMARC reject. Well worth the effort, though, because now you can tell everybody, hey, we got our act together. If you receive email and it doesn't from us and it doesn't pass DMARC, then it wasn't us. That takes care of the spoofing for them, or it should if everybody obeys it. And once again, Microsoft doesn't quite do that. So I would show you DKIM records, but DKIM records, the host name before the domain name could be anything. In the case of Microsoft, it's always selector 1 or selector 2, but it could be really anything. But it's always going to be a name like selector 1 dot underscore domain keys dot and then the domain name. So we'll probably go into a more in-depth on that another time, but that's the basics of what SPF, DKIM, and DMARC are. So till next time, click on the subscribe button, stay safe on the internet, and stay safe in Office 365.